The Indian military is slowly enhancing its power play in Myanmar. This comes even as United States military made headlines recently by landing in Bangladesh. Now India, it seems, is also boosting its military relations with the Myanmar junta. With the Myanmar Tatmadaw goodwill delegation from the Army, Navy and Air Force visiting Indian Army's Eastern Command headquarters at Vijaydurg, Kolkata. And on the other hand, Indian Armed Forces goodwill delegation from the Indian Army, Indian Navy and the Indian Air Force arriving in Naypyidaw. India has renewed its interest in Myanmar for the defense of its eastern borders and the seven sister states, with all major global superpowers, United States of America, China and now India, vying for influence in a country gripped in decades of violence between ethnic factions and one witnessing an exponential rise in drug trafficking. A stable India-Myanmar border has become a priority for the Narendra Modi government in New Delhi, with Prime Minister Modi himself visiting the state of Manipur recently on the border with Myanmar, with the situation now slowly returning to normalcy after years of civil unrest, fueled by external elements from inside Myanmar. But the Myanmar border region is not under the Burmese military control. Various factions backed by China or India are battling for control, and the United States too is using Bangladesh as a base to play a greater role in Myanmar to limit Chinese influence. For India, this visit by the Myanmar military delegation becomes vitally important. The Myanmar Army delegation was led by Bureau of Special Operations 1 or BSO-1 Commander Lieutenant General Koko O, stating, quote, "As part of bolstering the bilateral relationship, the Indian Army presented the Myanmar Army delegation with advanced IT lab equipment for strengthening digital training capabilities and enhancing information management." Unquote. The presentation underscored India's support to Myanmar for modernizing its defense infrastructure and fostering technology-driven cooperation. The two sides discussed measures to deepen defense cooperation, particularly in cutting-edge technology, with an emphasis on ensuring mutual security along the border. An important thing to note here is that Indian Army's detailed interaction with Myanmar took place exactly before a US military delegation arrived in Bangladesh's Chittagong region. US Air Force C-130J Super Hercules touched down at the Shah Amanat International Airport in Chittagong on the 15th of September. Remember, the tactical transport aircraft is normally based at the US Air Force's Yokota station in Japan. Now, the US government claims that this is part of a routine military exercise held throughout Indo-Pacific partner nations intended to strengthen defense cooperation, interoperability, and humanitarian response. On the other hand, the Bangladesh Army has largely remained cagey and silent about the presence of US forces and troops in Bangladesh, apart from acknowledging formal collaborations such as Operation Pacific Angel and Tiger Lightning 2025. The US delegation includes not only 140 US personnel from the military but also C-130J. Among the craft taking part in the exercise include 2 from the US Pacific Forces. Sources from Bangladesh Army revealed the aircraft were identified as C-130J Super Hercules 4-engine turboprop transports widely used for tactical airlift, airdrops, humanitarian missions, and special operations. Unquote. The presence of US military personnel in Chittagong is interesting since it lies in close proximity to the Indian border as well as the Myanmar border, which is currently controlled by the Arakan Army. Is this a sign of US backing for the Bangladesh government? Is the US going to use this exercise to spy on India? Such questions are largely speculation at the moment. But what sends alarm bells ringing in India is Bangladesh being used as a center for logistics and intelligence operations directed primarily at Myanmar, but one which could have an effect on India as well. As per the Economic Times, there are worries that countries outside South Asia, hint, China and the United States, could be using Bangladesh as a base to expand their influence in the Bay of Bengal region. This especially comes after the United States was accused of being involved in staging the violent protests which triggered the ouster of ex-Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in August 2024. In fact, these claims against the United States were made by Sheikh Hasina herself. There were reports that White House was unhappy with Hasina because she allegedly refused to hand over Bangladesh's Saint Martin Island to the United States for a military base. Important to note here that despite these reports, even the Yunus interim government has not handed over the island to the US so far, while in turn Yunus government has invited greater Pakistani and Chinese influence into his country. Is the US trying to use Bangladesh and in turn Myanmar to counter China's influence in South Asia? The US and China are also reportedly making overtures to Myanmar's rebel groups. This in turn could increase India's risk along the states that share a border with Myanmar. Now, Myanmar is also the world's third largest source of rare earth elements and minerals after China and the US. Last year, it accounted for almost half of the global mining of two specially important elements, dysprosium and terbium, which are essential for electric vehicles, wind turbines, and certain military hardware and gear. For Washington, Myanmar's deposits appear attractive as both a buffer against China's supply chain dominance and a strategic counterweight in Southeast Asia. United States, even after being the second largest producer, shockingly depends on China for nearly 3/4 of its rare earth imports, since Beijing controls over 85% of global processing. Reports suggest even India is eyeing rare earth imports from Myanmar rebel groups. New Delhi has been one of the strongest voices for the return to democracy in Myanmar. In fact, Prime Minister Modi told as much to Myanmar military leader General Aung Min Liang when the two leaders met at the BIMSTEC summit in Thailand earlier this year. A call Prime Minister Modi repeated when he met General Liang again at the SCO summit, this time in China last month. It seems efforts of India and the international community are finally working, with Myanmar military finally announcing December 28th as the date for the next elections, even offering cash incentives to the rebels to lay down their arms and participate in the democratic elections. But as usual, with global powers at play and so much at stake, there has already been large-scale opposition to the upcoming elections, along with calls for boycott. But as the most influential foreign factor inside Myanmar, China continues to play an important role in Myanmar's politics. Being the largest investor in Myanmar, China not only has ongoing infrastructure projects in the country, but also plays a large role in the trade. China supplies weapons to Myanmar military, and surprise, surprise, Chinese weapons also make their way to various rebel groups fighting the same military. Myanmar is very important for China's access to the Bay of Bengal and thus Indian Ocean shipping lanes. It is building the China-Myanmar trade corridor to connect its Yunnan province to the Bay of Bengal, thus bypassing the Malacca Strait choke point. Moreover, there's the issue of Coco Islands, which is troubling for India. Located just 55 kilometers north of India's Tri-Services Command in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, the Myanmar junta was converting this small 23 square kilometer island into a covert maritime surveillance base in collusion with China. The move by the PLA was aimed to gain strategic advantage and substantial access to critical Indian Ocean sea lanes and to keep an eye on Indian Tri-Services Command. In fact, the military junta allegedly offered shore and offshore facilities for Chinese intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance in exchange for weapons, military equipment and arms production facilities. Now, Chinese influence in Myanmar just cannot be ignored. However, it is vital for India's defense and security of its northeast that Myanmar returns to peace and democracy. And for that, New Delhi seems prepared finally to play a greater role in its neighboring country with high-profile military exchanges. But what do you believe? Is the United States' presence in Bangladesh a threat to India? Or can India and the US unite to counter Chinese influence in Myanmar? Leave a comment with your opinion, hit the like button and subscribe to Inconnect News.